The Chicago suburb lived its own quiet life. Straight streets lined with identical houses, well-kept lawns, the sound of lawnmowers in the mornings, the smell of barbecue in the evenings. Everything seemed calm, almost serene. Sophia sat on the porch of her house, holding a cup of coffee. It was early September. The air was cool, and the maple leaves were already touched with gold. She loved this time of year, quiet as if slowed down. Her husband, Ethan, was at work again. The fire station was only 20 minutes away, but his shifts lasted 48 hours, sometimes 72 if they were short on men. Sophia had grown used to the empty house, but each time she felt the same thing, loneliness. She let her gaze wander over the neighboring houses. Almost every family lived the same routine life. Husbands left for the office in the morning. Wives took care of the children. They didn't have kids yet. Sophia dreamed of a child, but Ethan always said, "Wait a little longer. Now is not the time." And so she sat alone once more. That day, for the first time, she noticed a neighbor across the street. A tall man, around 35, with dark hair and a weary look. He stood by the mailbox, flipping through envelopes. A wedding ring gleamed on his hand, but no one was beside him. Later, Sophia learned his name was Daniel. He was a literature teacher at the local school. A year ago, he had lost his wife in a car accident. Since then, he had lived alone. That evening, as she took out the trash, she met him by the road. "Good evening," she smiled, trying to sound casual. "Good evening," he replied. His voice was deep, slightly husky, as if he rarely spoke to people. For a few seconds they stood in awkward silence. Then Sophia turned and walked back first. Yet inside, a strange feeling lingered. She didn't know what exactly had changed that night, but the silence of the suburb no longer felt so familiar. The next morning was cool and clear. Sunlight fell across the rooftops of identical houses, and dewdrops sparkled on the grass. Sophia stood at the kitchen window, watching her neighbor across the street water the flowers by his porch. Daniel moved a measured, deliberate calm, as if every action carried some hidden meaning. His house stood out from the rest, not perfectly groomed, but with a certain warmth. Curtains hung in the windows, a wooden rocking chair sat by the entrance, and next to the door was a large pot with fading rose. Sophia found herself watching longer than politeness would normally allow. She caught herself thinking that she wanted to know what he was like in conversation. That same day, fate gave her a chance. On her way back from the supermarket, the heavy grocery bags nearly slipped from her hands. Daniel happened to be stepping outside just then and noticed her. "Let me help," he said, quickly coming over. He took 2 bags from her and carried them as if they weighed nothing. Sophia blushed but thanked him. "Thanks. I think I may have bought too much." "That's classic," he replied. "You always think, I'll just grab a couple of things, and end up coming back with enough food for a week." They both laughed, and the tension melted away. Inside Sophia's house, he set the bags on the table and was about to leave, but she surprised herself by saying, "Maybe a cup of coffee?" He froze for a moment, as if he hadn't expected the invitation. Then he nodded. Why not? They sat in the kitchen, in the small, cozy room filled with the aroma of freshly ground coffee. Sophia noticed his eyes, gray-green deep, carrying a hidden light. The conversation began with small talk, the weather, the neighborhood, work. But gradually it grew more personal. "I heard," Sophia began carefully, "you work at the school?" "Yes." "Literature. I try to convince teenagers that books aren't punishment, but a window into the world. Sometimes it works." He smiled, and there was something sad in that smile. "And you?" "I'm at home," she answered. "Sometimes I freelance a little, but mostly I wait for my husband." "He works a lot?" "Too much," she sighed. "He's a firefighter. He's hardly ever home." Daniel nodded, and in his eyes she caught a flicker of understanding. Their talk lasted longer than she had planned. By the time he finally got up to leave, the sun was already leaning toward the horizon. Sophia watched him go, and for the first time in a long while, she felt something like a spark of real interest. She knew it was dangerous, but her heart was beating just a little faster. Autumn in the Chicago suburb unfolded in all its beauty. The maple leaves blazed crimson, The air grew cooler, and the evening stretched longer and quieter. Sophia found herself going outside more often, as if searching for an excuse to accidentally cross paths with her neighbor. Daniel didn't avoid those encounters either. Sometimes they met at the mailboxes, sometimes in the supermarket parking lot. But more and more often, it was simply on the street when he took his evening walks. One such evening, he stopped by her yard and, with a slight smile, said, "Your place looks beautiful. Your husband must spend a lot of time working the garden?" Sophia laughed. "No, that's all me. Ethan couldn't care less about flowers. He thinks grass is the only thing a lawn needs. Then you've done a wonderful job. Flowers make a house feel alive." They fell into conversation right there by the gate, and before she realized it, an hour had passed. For the first time in a long while, Sophia laughed freely, without worrying that someone might judge her. The next day, he rang her doorbell holding a book in his hand. Asterisk, I thought you might like this. The Great Gatsby. Asterisk, I read it in college, but that was ages ago. She said, taking the book. Sometimes it's worth rereading. The same words sound different at different times in life. She felt he wasn't speaking only about the book. From then on, they began exchanging volumes. He brought her Faulkner, Steinbeck, sometimes poetry. She read in the evenings while Ethan was on shift, and later discussed the stories with Daniel on a bench in the park. Gradually, their conversations drifted beyond literature. She told him about her dreams, of having a child, of opening the small bakery she had always wanted. He spoke of how he missed his wife, how sometimes at night it felt as though she were still alive. One day, he admitted, "When I lost her, I thought I would disappear too. Everything lost its meaning. But sometimes you meet people who bring back a taste for life." Sophia looked at him, not knowing what to say. Her heart was beating far too fast. They still hadn't touched, but there was more intimacy in their conversations than in the rare dinners she shared with her husband. That night, as she went to bed alone, Sophia wondered, am I doing something wrong? Or is this just friendship? But deep inside, she already knew the line had almost been crossed. That evening, rain once again fell over the suburb. It drummed softly on the rooftops, leaving shining trails across the asphalt. Sophia sat by the window, watching the light in the house across the street. Daniel's desk lamp was on. He was reading, as always. She caught herself wishing she were there. Not here. Ethan was on another night shift. The emptiness of the house pressed on her so heavily that the silence felt almost physical. At last, she gathered the courage to send a message. "If you're not busy, come over for tea. It's too quiet here." The reply came quickly. "I'd love to." 20 minutes later, he knocked on her door. They sat in the kitchen, listening to the sound of the rain and talking about little things. But between the words lingered a tension that hadn't been there before. "Are you alone often?" he asked suddenly. "Almost always," she admitted. "Sometimes it feels like I live in an empty house." He was silent for a long time, then said quietly, "You don't deserve that." She lifted her eyes and met his gaze. In that moment, time seemed to stop. In his eyes, she saw something she hadn't seen in Ethan's for a long time: warmth, attention, the desire to understand. And then, the thing they had both feared happened. His hand rested on hers. Sophia trembled, but didn't pull away. Instead, her fingers closed around his. The silence grew heavy. The rain outside sounded like music. He leaned closer. She could have pulled back, could have said no, but instead, her lips met his. The kiss was soft, tentative, yet full of strength, built up over months of silent loneliness. When they pulled away, Sophia whispered quickly, "We shouldn't." "I know," he replied, "but sometimes life doesn't ask." He left soon after, and she remained at the kitchen table, her hand still remembering the touch of his. That night, Sophia barely slept. She understood a crack had formed, and the home she lived in would never be the same again. After that evening, everything changed. Sophia tried to carry on as usual, shopping, calling her husband, smiling at the neighbors. But inside, everything was different. Every message from Daniel made her heart beat faster. Every fleeting glance between them became a secret. At first, they met under the pretense of books. He would bring her new volumes. She would invite him for tea, and the conversations would stretch late into the night. Then he began stopping by more often, sometimes without any reason at all. "You look tired," he said one day. "Because I think too much," she answered. "About what?" "About doing something wrong. And yet, I can't stop." He didn't reply. He only took her hand. Soon, their walks around the neighborhood turned into hours of deep conversation. They talked about everything, from favorite movies to fears they had never confessed to anyone else. Sophia opened up to him in ways she hadn't opened up even to her husband in years. And then came the day when words were no longer enough. It happened at his house. She had brought him a pie, just because. Daniel invited her in, and suddenly they were too close. His hand brushed her face, and she didn't pull away. The kiss was long, burning, and what followed was everything they had resisted for so long. That evening, Sophia spent the night away from home for the first time. When she returned in the morning, the sun was already rising over the suburb. The keys trembled in her hand. She knew she had crossed a line there was no coming back from. Ethan called around noon, brief as always. "We had a tough call, but everything's fine. How are you?" "I'm fine," she lied. Sophia sat on the bed, feeling torn apart inside. On one side was her husband, the man she owed her loyalty. On the other was the man with whom her life had regained color. She knew the truth would come out sooner or later. But for now, those secret nights were her only breath of life. October in the suburb was cold and rainy. The streets were covered with wet leaves, and the sky was almost always gray. Sophia increasingly caught herself thinking that the rain reminded her of Daniel. Every drop seemed to conceal their secret. But secrets have one flaw. They always leave traces. When Ethan returned after a 3-day shift, he looked at her differently for the first time. In his eyes was something new. Suspicion. "You look different," he said, taking off his jacket. "What do you mean?" Sophia's heart began to race. "I don't know. As if your thoughts are somewhere else." She tried to smile. "Maybe I'm just tired." He nodded, but his gaze remained heavy. That night, Ethan woke unexpectedly and noticed her phone lying face down. She had never done that before. When he picked it up, Sophia woke with a start. "What are you doing?" Her voice cracked. "Just checking the time." "Why are you nervous?" She turned away, trying to hide her trembling. From that moment on, Ethan became more attentive. He started asking questions. Where she had been, who she had talked to, why she stayed so long at the store. His intuition, sharpened by years on the job, told him something wasn't right. And inside Sophia, fear began to grow. She tried to distance herself from Daniel, to talk less, but the moment she heard his voice on the phone, she couldn't resist. Their secret meetings continued, short, tense, but hungry. Each one felt more dangerous than the last. One night, lying next to her husband, she caught a faint scent, the unmistakable trace of men's cologne still clinging to her skin after Daniel's embrace. She froze, terrified Ethan might notice. He said nothing, but turned away to face the wall. Sophia understood. He knew something, or at least he felt it, and in that moment, their home was no longer safe. By early November, the wind had grown stronger, and the trees had shed nearly all their leaves. The evenings grew darker, and Sophia felt that, along with the weather, her own life was closing in on her. One such evening, she left the house to go to the store. In truth, she was going to Daniel's. Their meetings had become less frequent, but the desire to see each other only grew stronger. They sat in his living room, listening to quiet music, trying to talk about ordinary things. But both knew a shadow hung over them. How much longer can this go on? Daniel asked at last, unable to hold back. "You can't live in two worlds forever." Sophia lowered her eyes. "I'm not ready to destroy everything." "But isn't it already destroyed?" She wanted to argue, but didn't have the chance. A loud, insistent knock came at the door. Daniel stiffened. Sophia froze. He opened it, and there stood Ethan. Soaked jacket, face lined with exhaustion and fury. "So this is where you are. Sophia," he said, without even looking at his wife. His eyes were locked on Daniel. The neighbor, the teacher. Great choice. "Ethan," Sophia stepped forward, but his voice cut her down. "Don't." The silence was worse than shouting. "How long?" he asked Daniel. "How long have you been sleeping with my wife?" Daniel tried to keep his composure. "It's not what you think. Not what I think." Ethan took a sharp step closer. "I spent 3 days risking my life in burning buildings to put food on the table, and you—" Sophia sobbed. "Please, don't." But the tension was already unstoppable. Daniel stepped between them. "Listen, I never wanted it to happen like this." Ethan struck first. The blow was quick, raw, fueled by sleepless nights and gnawing suspicion. Daniel staggered, but didn't hit back. "Enough!" Sophia cried. "Stop!" But her words vanished into the sound of their ragged breathing. Ethan stepped back toward the door. His face was stone. "You're dead to me, Sophia," he said quietly. "Dead." And he walked out into the night, slamming the door so hard the walls shook. Sophia collapsed to her knees. Daniel tried to help, but she pushed him away. In her eyes was despair. She knew she had destroyed everything. After that night, there was no turning back. Ethan didn't return home. He packed his things and moved in with a colleague from the firehouse. Sophia tried calling him, but every attempt ended with a short, empty tone. On the third day, the papers came, a divorce filing. She sat in the kitchen, hands trembling as she held the document. It felt as if her entire house had become foreign. The silence, once just emptiness, had turned into a sentence. She ran to Daniel. He opened the door and understood everything the moment he saw her face. He filed. She breathed, and the tears spilled on their own. Daniel held her, but his eyes weren't the same as before. In them was doubt. "Sophia," he began, "I don't want you to think that I can replace everything you had. What are you saying?" Her voice cracked. "Didn't I lose it all for us?" He looked away. "I never asked you to destroy your marriage. I'm guilty too, but I'm not ready." The words cut sharper than any knife. "You're not ready?" she repeated. "And me? I'm alone now." He stepped back, as if afraid of her pain. "I'm sorry." That night, Sophia walked home along the cold, wind-lashed street, feeling, for the first time in her life, utterly alone. The weeks that followed became a nightmare. Neighbors began whispering. She felt their stares, pitying, judgmental. Ethan's friends stopped acknowledging her. Even the market vendor, once so cheerful, now served her with cold indifference. And Daniel, he avoided her more and more. He said he was busy, tired, not ready for serious conversations. Sophia knew he was pulling away. She had lost her husband, lost her lover, lost the respect of her community. And every evening she sat by the window, staring out at the empty street, thinking, where did I take the wrong turn? At what moment did everything fall into ruin? Her life was collapsing, like an old house battered by the wind. Winter in the Chicago suburb was harsh. Snow fell in thick layers on rooftops and roads. But Sophia barely noticed the beauty around her. Her days had become monotonous. Brief calls from her lawyer, cold letters in the mail, the silence of a house that now only reminded her of the past. The neighbors had completely stopped greeting her. When she went to the mailbox, the curtains across the street would twitch slightly. People were watching, but pretending she didn't exist. Daniel had almost entirely disappeared. One day, she gathered the courage to knock on his door. He opened it himself, but there was no joy on his face, only fatigue. "Sophia," he said quietly, "please don't come anymore. This isn't right." Those words crushed her. She nodded, as if she understood everything, and left, feeling the last spark of hope die inside her. That evening, sitting in the living room, she watched the fire in the fireplace. But the warmth didn't reach her. She remembered the early months of her marriage with Ethan. Laughter, plans, talks about the future. Then the long evenings of loneliness, the waiting, and now emptiness. "I wanted love, and I'm left with nothing," she thought. That night, the lights in her house went out early. No one saw her sitting on the floor in the dark, clutching an old photograph. She and Ethan, smiling happy, still unaware that everything would fall apart. The snow kept falling, covering the street in a white blanket. Through the windows, lights burned in other houses, warm, full of life. But her house stood dark, without a single light. And it seemed that with that light, Sophia herself had disappeared.